Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Mercy of the God of War. Episode 8. Most of the Imperial family had their eyes on her for the rest of the evening, including some murderous glares. Cassandra didn't feel as scared as she could have, though. Karen's warm hand was on her at all times, caressing her arm, shoulder, back, or neck. He was making her confident with his presence right behind her. It was easier to ignore them if she wasn't scared. As the couple silently ate, watching the performers, Cassandra realized she would now be wearing a pink dress as a high-ranking concubine. The Emperor's words had made it clear her status had changed again. Did this mean she would be safer or in more trouble? It was hard to predict. As soon as they could, Karen and Cassandra went back to their room, leaving the Imperial feast without looking back. Even after returning to the prince's apartments, Cassandra didn't feel calm or safe at all. She slowly took off her jewelry, frowning a bit. "Did you ask your father for all this? Or your men?" she asked Karen, who was waiting for her on the bed. "No." So the general really had sent this letter on his own accord. Cassandra couldn't help but wonder if anything had happened back at the military camp. It was all going too fast for her. She sighed a bit, taking off the last piece of her jewelry, and walked to her prince, who put his arms around her. His fingers gently caressed her skin, making sure to undo her dress in the process. "Are you tired?" he whispered. "Just a bit." "I didn't expect His Majesty to." Cassandra interrupted her sentence, frowning. She was staring down, behind Karen's back. Something was moving under the bed sheets. "Cassandra! Don't move." She slowly took the sword at his side, taking it out in silence. The prince frowned and was about to turn around when Cassandra screamed. "Karen, no!" Just as he moved, Cassandra aimed the blade down, piercing the mattress. A stain of red appeared on the sheets, a few inches away from his hand. She pulled the sheets back, revealing the snake, pinned down by the blade. The prince took the sword from her hands, glaring furiously at the snake. Cassandra was about to grab the snake, but he got to it first. "It's not a venomous one," she sighed in relief. "I couldn't tell under the sheet." To her surprise, Karen suddenly pulled her in for a kiss. She blushed, pushing him away. "It is not the time to. You called me by my name." Cassandra blushed even more. Yes, she did, without thinking. In the panic of the moment, she had called his name, the one she had in her mind for days. Someone put a snake in our bed, and... Cassandra. She turned to him, unable to look him in the eyes. Karen was smiling, one of his signature minimalistic smiles. He kissed her again, but Cassandra took the dead reptile from his hand and eluded him, too embarrassed to focus. "It's a krakow snake," she whispered. "They are not venomous, but the bite can be painful, and." "And what?" asked Karen. "It can be dangerous for children or pregnant women." The war god's eyes darkened as he glanced at the dead snake. "This thing?" Cassandra didn't seem worried, now that it was dead in her hand. "These types of snakes do not live in this area. It must have cost a fortune to bring it here." I don't think the person who did this knows anything about snakes. You can find lethal ones or less dangerous ones in the capital. They are cheaper, too. They wanted to hurt you, growled Karen. I think they meant to scare me. Not a lot of people knew about my pregnancy until tonight. Those who did couldn't have bought the snake so fast. Maybe they already had the snake, but it's a peculiar species, so it doesn't matter. They'll pay. To his surprise, Cassandra nodded and turned to him. If we find out who did this, can we do something about it? Even if it's one of your siblings. You think I'd let it go? If it's the Imperial family? Karen shook his head and grabbed her hand. Cassandra. She stared into his black eyes for a while, and after a few seconds, she understood. She came first. Their unborn child came first. Whoever did this, he wouldn't let it go. He was the war god, after all. Not someone who'd stay still after such a vicious threat. Cassandra nodded. I can find out who did this. She turned around, and carefully put the dead snake into a basket. She washed her hands thoroughly in the little basin. Behind her, Karen pulled the dirty bed sheets away and laid his fur cloak on the mattress. They didn't need a blanket to sleep anyway, the capital's humid air was hot enough. Cassandra walked back to him, putting her arms around his neck. Karen held her close, pulling them both on the bed. Are you not afraid? He asked in a whisper. I'm scared for our baby. I just hope he can be born safely. So many people hate me, but here, it's a matter of life and death every single time. She sighed silently, and before she could add anything else or worry more, Karen pulled her in for a kiss. Their lips intertwined, and their tongues touched, looking for each other's warmth. Cassandra felt her heartbeat fasten, and climbed on his lap, closer. She was now the one pulling him with her hands, caressing his shoulders and torso. Her warmth was rising slowly. The prince pulled her dress down to her hips, exposing her bare chest. He began caressing her with his large hands. Yet, a strange desire was rising in Cassandra. Hesitantly, she pushed him down. Karen didn't resist at all. Instead, he laid beneath her, letting her ride him with a faint smile. For once, Cassandra was being willful and bold, and he didn't hate it at all. She was breathing harder and louder, undulating her hips, a pearl of sweat running down her body. Cassandra's every breath was so enticing, and those which turned into moans were even worse. The war god couldn't take his eyes off his concubine. With her on top of him, riding him, he wouldn't miss a second of this delightful scene. She was the one guiding him, imposing her rhythm, and it was good, so good, for both of them. Laying down under her, holding her hips. Karen was mesmerized by the balancing movement of her hair, the sparkles in her emerald eyes, and her skin, shyly going from white to an adorably excited pink. He could spend hours like this. Unfortunately, his concubine couldn't. Cassandra kept moaning louder, feeling him between her legs and the pleasure that was rising inside like a raging fire. My lord, my name, Cassandra. Call my name. Karen, Karen. She kept repeating it, like a spell. Her eyes closed, she was biting her lips and focusing on their connected bodies. Karen caressed her, making her shiver. She liked it. Cassandra would close her eyes when she couldn't face his dark eyes anymore, and her cheeks were redder than ever. She was close to the edge. The prince finally started acting up, moving his hips under her, little assaults that took her by surprise, as Cassandra had to hold on to his shoulders. He wouldn't give her any rest, though. He kept swinging, making her cry in pleasure above him, only slowing down when she truly begged him to, until both of them were tired, pleased, and relieved. The concubine slowly fell to his side, exhausted. She was still sweating a bit from all that exercise and trying to catch her breath. Karen was satisfied too. A warm feeling in his chest, he turned to her, making sure she was okay. He caressed her arm and back gently until Cassandra fell asleep, won over by the exhaustion. Then, he sat up and used the towels in the room to wipe her up a little, and covered her with a thin silk sheet. Only then did he come back to lay next to her, putting an arm around his concubine. They had come a long way from the time he first met her. His concubine hadn't revealed any of her secrets back then, her knowledge in medicine, or her admirable willpower. She was just a common woman, among many others, and she had never tried to step above the others or put herself first. She remained pure throughout, the exact same girl that had stood at his feet. Karen glanced at the basket, where the dead snake was. He wouldn't forgive whoever it was. Not when they had tried to harm her, and their baby. His eyes glanced over her little tummy. How much longer? As long as they are both safe. He'd rather take Cassandra out of this wretched place, but for now, he didn't have much choice. Too many things were happening at once, and with all of his family gathered. Events could unfold drastically at any time now. He hated the idea, though. Their allies within the walls were very few. He didn't trust any of them fully, except maybe his mother. The next morning, they both got ready in silence. Someone had already delivered a new set of magnificent pink dresses for Cassandra. She picked a pale pink one that complemented her complexion perfectly. Her prince was also very satisfied while helping her get dressed up. He caressed her hair and the fine gauze of her dress layers. She could tell he really liked it on her and picked a matching set of pink diamond jewelry. Their time together didn't last long, though. Karen was soon called to the Emperor's early military council, while Cassandra was invited to Imperial concubine Karen's quarters for breakfast. They parted early, but he made sure Cassandra wouldn't be alone. Hence, the young concubine walked through the gardens, along with a very voluntary Cray, the huge dragon happily toddling right next to her. It was still early in the morning and the temperature was right to Cassandra's taste, along with a little breeze. She took her time, knowing the Imperial concubine hadn't set an exact time. Cassandra had never really taken time to visit the Imperial gardens by herself, but despite their beauty, they weren't as wild and free as the ones in the Diamond Palace. She definitely couldn't come to like this Imperial Palace. Something about it always felt wrong to her. Too big, too wide, too luxurious, and too dangerous. Don't make yourself too comfortable. Behind a pillar, followed by half a dozen servants, Princess Fitra was there, along with her younger half-sibling, Princess Kayuna. Both had very different stances. While Fitra was standing tall and crossing her arms in a proud stance, Cuyuna, on the contrary, was looking down and fidgeting with her hands as if she was embarrassed and didn't want to be there, avoiding Cassandra's eyes and her sister's. The young concubine took a deep breath and bowed slightly to them. Phaedra had been infuriated by her new status, and it was still obvious in the way she glared at Cassandra's brand new pale pink dress. "Good morning, Your Highnesses. Where are you off to?" asked the princess in that imperial tone of hers. "I was invited to have breakfast with Imperial concubine Karine." Of course. Phaedra's words had some deep meaning, but Cassandra couldn't grasp it all. She just knew she didn't want to stay near that woman. Though they obviously didn't like her, the other princesses didn't look at her in such a murderous, hateful way. Cassandra had felt it early on. Just like the second prince hated Karen to the core, she could tell Phaedra was just as dangerous. Phaedra stared at her for a while, from head to toe, with disgust. "I miss the time when slaves couldn't even step inside the palace, near us." Cassandra felt anger rise in her heart. Slaves could only enter the palace to be killed in their games, or if someone from the imperial family took them in, just like Karen had done for her. The young concubine wasn't upset because Phaedra was disgusted by her presence, but because of the princess' obvious revulsion for slaves. But Cassandra couldn't say anything. Cray was slowly growling behind her, but the dragon probably wouldn't injure a member of the imperial family, unless they really tried to harm Cassandra in some way. "If you'll excuse me, Your Highnesses, I need to get going." Without waiting for their permission, Cassandra turned her heels and started walking away, trying to repress all of her feelings against that woman. Cray was following from up close, but the dragon's red eyes never left the princesses. "You were right, you know." Cassandra stopped, turning to her. What did she possibly mean by that? What was she right about? As she was trying to find the answer, Phaedra's icy smirk chilled her to the bone. The princess was obviously enjoying this, and maybe for the first time in a long while, Cassandra felt truly scared. 506. Cassandra was lost. What was she? But after a few seconds, the young concubine understood and all the blood left her face. Princess Cuyuna was looking down, with something like shame painted all over her face. But Phaedra was thrilled. She died after the 506th. Cassandra felt so sick and disgusted, she thought she was going to collapse. That woman was so wretched. She had, really. You know, it was almost exciting. Waiting to see when she would finally die. I took a normal whip, of course, and counted. Each one. Myself. She had said those last words so slowly, like she was savoring them. For Cassandra, it was too much. She stepped back, turned, and walked away as fast as she could. Phaedra was evil. Pure evil. How could one be so inhumane as to do that to another human being? And enjoy it? And take the time to count? She almost ran to the Imperial concubine's quarters, much to Cray's concern. The dragon was staring at her, curious about her behavior, trying to get her attention with soft growls, but the young concubine wouldn't stop. She kept going, trembling, trying to get there faster. No, the truth was, what she truly wanted was to get away from Phaedra. When she arrived there, Trembling and almost out of breath, the imperial concubine got up, frowning. "You little, why are you running? What is it, child? What would cause you to put my grandchild's safety in danger like this?" Cassandra tried to catch her breath, shaking her head. She walked up to her, almost falling on her knees at the imperial concubine's side. Corinne frowned and caressed her hair, unhappy. "Tell me, Cassandra." They were not bonded by blood, but at that very moment, and for the following hour, Corinne acted like a mother to Cassandra. As the young concubine was silently weeping, she caressed her hair gently, waiting for her to calm down. She couldn't speak for a long while. Her throat felt hoarse. Cassandra had heard too much in those few sentences. Phaedra had cruelly reminded her how terrible it could be. That woman had a similar status to hers, that of a concubine, yet Phaedra had gotten rid of her so easily. This was the power of an imperial princess. "How did you do it?" she whispered. "How did you survive among them?" "You mean among those privileged and hungry?" "A lot of willpower and trusting no one but my own blood. Remember my words, Cassandra. No one gets to such a position with clean hands. Even myself." I know, but…" "Cassandra, look at me. Now." Her order was clear. The young concubine had no choice but to look up, with tears in her eyes. Corinne's stare was fiercer than ever. She took Cassandra's face between her long fingers. "Listen to this old woman, pretty flower. I grew up among merchants. Before I was 10, I knew how to lie, bargain, and steal. How to exploit the weak and be on the stronger end of the deal. My mentor took me inside this place when I was 12. Not because he wanted to teach me, but because he was a snake who wanted to take advantage of a child that was smarter than he was. I was even smarter than he thought and made sure the emperor knew, too. I did not expect that stubborn old man would take a liking to me, but I knew how wretched all of his women were. I would have been terrified, if he had other women than me. Even just one." Cassandra shivered. In a way, she had been lucky to be picked by Karen. When she was still a slave, she had seen how such jealousy could tear families apart, burn houses, and leave women homeless in the streets, even with their children. The minister she had served had kicked away 2 of his women to please the newer one, and Cassandra remembered all of the children Corinne had lost. "Imagine walking in a room full of hungry tigers," whispered Corinne. "Only one master is holding all of their leashes, so you can't help but get a few scratches getting to him." "You lost children," said Cassandra. "I don't know what I'd do if I lost this baby." At that moment, the imperial concubine's smile got even scarier than Phaedra's earlier. "When that happens, you become something much more dangerous than those tigers, Cassandra. Trust me. You become a 2-headed monster that won't ever return to its original self again. I don't forget and I don't forgive. All his women know that. It's exactly why they all fear me more. I don't want to become like you." The woman chuckled, caressing her cheek. "I know, pretty flower, and I won't let you. I promise. You have this old woman and her son to look after you. I want to see this child's birth, Cassandra. If I have one thing to do before I leave this world, it is to see the face of my grandchildren." Cassandra slowly nodded. She had stayed with Corinne only for a few weeks, but she admired that woman greatly, and trusted her. Like Karen had said, she was probably their greatest and strongest ally in this palace. Cassandra felt lucky she had come here with them. Despite Phaedra's threats or all the jealous concubines, she knew there was at least someone willing to protect her. Cassandra was not a fighter. She was among those women who had been born with a frail body, but had grown very wise. Wipe your tears, Cassandra. Don't show them your weakness, ever. If they think you're weak, they'll enjoy your suffering twice as much. Don't give them that. Princess Phaedra is an obnoxious little swine. Just like her brother. They hate me and my children to the core. Why? Their mother made the mistake of trying to defy me. She shouldn't have. Cassandra frowned. So this was all about some revenge? Was that Phaedra's case as well? What had happened to their mother? Despite her curiosity, Cassandra knew Corinne enough by now to know that she wouldn't say anything else. Well, let's have breakfast now, shall we? I won't let my grandson starve, and his mother is still too thin. Servants. Immediately, a horde of Imperial servants hurried in, bringing endless gold trays of food. It was time for her to dry her tears indeed. The two women ate silently, but Cassandra knew things wouldn't settle like this. She told Corinne about the snake after they finished their meal, but to her surprise, the Imperial concubine didn't seem worried or surprised in the slightest. She elegantly wiped her lips, nodding as if she had already known about it. It wasn't a poisonous one. No, I am sure. Unless they knew I was pregnant and had prepared ahead, but they're just playing around then. Playing? Repeated Cassandra, shocked. Corinne stood up, walking further inside her apartments to get changed. Cassandra had seen her shamelessly change her clothes in open spaces in the Diamond Palace before. It was nothing surprising. As she had learned over time, the Imperial family members shared loose morals, especially over nudity. Moreover, only women were allowed in here. 3 servants helped her change into a dark pink dress, with purple and golden embroidery in it. Cassandra wondered if this was a gift from the Emperor. If they wanted to kill you, they wouldn't have sent such a petty threat. Not into the war god's room. My son won't die of something so insignificant. His dragon blood wouldn't even have felt the difference. That thing was directed at you, most likely. Me? Why would someone want to scare me? You're the new one and the only concubine of the 3rd prince. All the concubines around here like to play like children. They fool around like this all the time, testing each other, seeing who's the stronger woman. But you're not a child anymore. You're a mother. Corinne turned to her, crossing her arms, while the servants were struggling to do her hair. It's time you show those women you are not to be toyed around with. Not because you're protected by Karen, but on your own. Cassandra shook her head. I doubt I'm strong enough to scare them. You don't have to be strong, you have to be smart. And we both know how smart you really are, Cassandra. A woman with your past and knowledge is the one they should be most scared of. She didn't even have anything to reply to that. She took one step back, shaking her head. How? How could she prove to these women they shouldn't mess with her? Her whole life, Cassandra had struggled to stay out of sight, unnoticed, but things were different now. She had no more room to hide and all eyes were on her. Cassandra knew Corinne had simply voiced the truth, but it terrified her. Not all of those women were like Phaedra, but some still were. Later that same day, Cassandra left Corinne's apartments, holding a basket in her hands. She knew where to go, but she only lacked a bit of courage. It was still early, and she only crossed a few servants on her way out. She was relieved not to meet anyone from the Imperial family. She walked all the way to the outer gardens. It was the same place that she had seen her former and last owner face a brutal death, the gardens. The concubine's favorite resting place. It was rumored to be the most beautiful place in the palace, but Cassandra couldn't care for it. Most of the concubines were gathered there for their breakfast, those who weren't accompanying their masters, anyway. They giggled and exchanged sweets and pleasantries, seemingly getting along with each other. Cassandra didn't believe any of those interactions were real. As soon as she entered the gardens, all the women stopped talking, their eyes on her. Some were showing curiosity, others were defiant or hateful. Cassandra did her best not to betray her emotions and walked to the middle of the place with her basket. "Did you get lost?" asked one of the concubines with a naughty tone. "Shall we bow to her? I'd rather drown in the lake than ever bow to a slave." Cassandra took a deep breath and put the basket down. Some of the concubines who had remained silent, frowned. What was she planning? "You, why are your hands this color?" One of the young concubines was pointing at Cassandra's blue fingertips and nails. Turning to the young woman, she showed it better, raising her hands to show them. "This? I got a little infection. A wild snake ventured into my room last night." Most concubines knew this snake was probably not simply wandering on its own in her bedroom, but of course, they all remained silent. They either thought she was too stupid to realize, or too smart to say it out loud. "Luckily, His Highness caught it," said Cassandra. "But, this type of snake's skin can be extremely dangerous when it's an impregnated female. The scales contain some of its venom, only in smaller portions. Just touching it can provoke someone's death within a few days." One of the concubines giggled. "Are you going to die? With those blue fingers? This? Oh, no. Luckily, since we caught the snake, I managed to make an antidote in time. It made my fingertips blue from crushing the scales to make a broth with some medical herbs. I was lucky, though. While it will kill instantly with a bite, if you touch its skin, most victims would die in their sleep within a few days. The poison spreads slowly through the fingers' crevasses, making them more and more tired until they won't wake up. This is ridiculous. I've never heard of such a way of dying," said one of the other women. "I'm not surprised, this is a rare snake," said Cassandra. "Back where I come from, we call it the sleep thief. Because the victim will feel more and more sleepy until they can't stop sleeping and slowly die in their sleep." The women started gossiping between themselves, wondering if it was true. Cassandra took the basket back and slowly walked over to one side, washing away her hands in the little river that crossed the garden. She did her best to ignore all the eyes on her. It was a bet, but she knew she could find the culprit this way if everything went according to her plan. She wasn't proud of it, but she knew she had to be a bit like Corinne. Unforgiving. Chapter 9. When Cassandra felt she had stayed in their sight for long enough, she took her basket back and left without adding a word. Ignoring all the stares on her, she only went a bit further away, into another garden, with a wider sample of vegetation and an artificial lake and fountain. There, she dipped her bare feet in the shallow water, humming calmly. Her plan was so simple, yet she wondered if it'd work. Most of the concubines had watched when she washed her hands and saw the blue marks that wouldn't go away. Of course, it was on purpose. Cassandra had washed laundry countless times before. She knew what colorants were the hardest to wash away, especially without any kind of soap. If she wanted, she could have gotten rid of it, but this was all part of her plan. First, have the concubines and princesses believe her story. Even if they didn't believe her at first, the odd blue color she couldn't seem to wash off her fingers and nails should have planted a seed of doubt in their minds. That was all she needed. Just a little bit of doubt, ignorance mixed with a bit of fear, and time for it to grow inside a narrow mind. As she rested on her own by the lake, she was surprised to see 3 young women come to her side. She frowned a bit. Those women seemed to be sneering between themselves while glancing her way. 2 of them had a red dress and only the one walking ahead had a pink one. She had seen those women before. All of them were among the 5th prince's concubines. How many did he have exactly? Concubine Cassandra, do you mind if we accompany you for a bit? Cassandra shook her head. Since those women were on the same level as her, she didn't have to show any extra politeness, but she shouldn't be too rude either. Corinne had already scolded her many times for acting too submissive when she didn't need to, and Cassandra was diligently trying to apply her advice even more now that she was accounted for as a high-ranked concubine. We were worried you'd feel unwelcome over there, with such a crowd. It must be suffocating to face so many women at the same time, said the one in a pink dress. It's fine, simply replied Cassandra. She was wary of those women. She had no idea why they would want anything to do with her, the newly brought concubine. If it was merely out of curiosity, it would be fine. All 3 of them sat within a reasonable distance of her, but, judging from the places they took, it was obvious the one with a pink dress was the leader of the trio. It is such a blessing to finally see a concubine to the 3rd prince. His Highness must be delighted to have you. Cassandra couldn't help but wonder if her pregnancy was known to everyone yet. Unlike some of the other women, she wasn't exposing her baby bump. Back in the previous garden, some of the concubines were so proud of their pregnancies, they were showing off their big bellies. On the contrary, Cassandra wasn't exposing as much skin. Her dress was fully covering her stomach, protecting it from the sun and obvious stares. Not all the concubines had been there at the feast last night, but Cassandra knew the chances were high that the news of her bearing the war god's child had probably spread already. Thanks. She didn't want to get too friendly with other concubines. None of them could have been there by mistake. You couldn't stay a prince's concubine, residing in the Imperial palace, if you couldn't take care of yourself first. No woman in this place was as innocent as they looked. For a few minutes, the 3 women pretended to talk between themselves, about trivial matters such as the weather and their prince's latest concerns, but Cassandra knew they were observing her. She pretended not to know and soaked her feet, ignoring them. "Lady Cassandra, what do you think of this?" Wondering what topic they had finally decided to share with her, she turned her head to them. The woman in a pink dress had a cunning smile Cassandra didn't like. "My servant made a mistake this morning. I thought I should punish her, but my friends thought I should be nice to her and let it go. She has been a very nice servant of mine for a while, but, recently, I've been thinking she's acting too much in front of my dearest prince. I think maybe the little swine is trying to seduce one's prince. What do you think?" Cassandra frowned a bit. It may have seemed like a trivial matter, but her words were heavier than they seemed. Was she hinting at how a servant or a slave, like Cassandra, had dared to seduce a prince? She obviously had no idea. Cassandra sighed. "I wonder why you should punish her. Isn't the fifth prince the one to have many concubines? If he can split his love so easily, you should be used to His Highness welcoming one more every once in a while, right?" The concubine's expression turned sour. Cassandra was clear, though. She wouldn't let this woman imply they were in the same situation or that Cassandra had stolen anyone's property. She couldn't compare her prince with his womanizer of a brother. Basically anyone could become the fifth prince's concubine, with a good body and some sense of seduction. No wonder those women were jealous to death and eager to start fights at any given occasion. "At least she isn't some slave," said one of those in a red dress, pretending to talk to her peer. "It has to be difficult, you know. We should even pity her," said the other one. "I mean, the Imperial family can be so willful. If it's only a slave or a servant, they can be wiped out without blinking and no one will even remember them." Cassandra ignored them, a bit annoyed. Were all concubines so petty? So childish? Did they think they could toy with her? She wasn't a slave anymore, so why would she listen to this nonsense? Seeing Cassandra wasn't flinching, the concubine in the pink dress clicked her tongue. She thought she had found easy prey, but this wasn't as fun as she had thought. "You know, it's been done before. Servants taken as concubines and forgotten the next day. Sent to feed the dragons." "Really?" said Cassandra, her voice remaining very calm. Her experience as dragon food probably was not the one they had imagined at all. Actually, Cassandra smiled, remembering her first encounter with both Karen and his dragon. Seeing her like this, the concubine became red, annoyed at her passive response. Wasn't going to worry at all. The war god wasn't anywhere in sight, so how could she keep acting so mighty? She wasn't even that pretty. Well, slaves are meant to be tough after all. Once again, Cassandra ignored her. She couldn't be affected by such a petty attitude. Actually, she thought this concubine was acting like an annoying flea, trying to bother her with baseless sentences and a mighty attitude. She couldn't be bothered by that, or she wouldn't be able to withstand one more day here. After dipping her toes in the fresh water some more, turning a blind ear to their nonsense, Cassandra stood up, brushing her hair a bit. To her surprise, the concubine stood up too and stepped closer. "Now that I see you up close." Cassandra did not like this woman being so close. Aside from her prince and his family, she hadn't gotten used to anyone being so close. She took a step back and the concubine in pink smiled, mistakenly thinking she was afraid. If, one was to disappear, mysteriously. I wonder how long it would take one to worry. Was this woman a foolish? Or did she think Cassandra was that weak to be scared by such a childish threat? Cassandra had learned to be afraid of the Imperial family. Whether it was a princess or a prince, she would have definitely been scared. But a concubine was only a woman, like her. "Are you threatening me?" she asked. Her calm but cold voice was sending a warning. Only the two women in the red dresses understood and carefully stepped back, looking pale and worried. Truth was, Cassandra herself wasn't scary at all, but her calm and confidence in this situation was something their instincts couldn't underestimate. Unfortunately, the other concubine missed that warning, smiling like a cat once again. It was as if she had found an easy prey to toy with, and would play until she had enough. Only, Cassandra wasn't in the mood to be playing at all. "Why would I threaten you, Lady Cassandra? We are both concubines, after all. It would be a shame if anything happened, by accident." Cassandra hated that word. No accident ever happened in the Imperial Palace. As the other woman kept stepping forward, she kept retreating, closer and closer to the pond, until her heels were touching the water. "Do you think I'm scared?" Cassandra's sudden question, said in a clear voice, finally managed to make her doubt. She frowned. She had been retreating all this time, wasn't she scared? "Step back," ordered Cassandra. Her soft and gentle voice didn't match her words. Hence, the concubine didn't move and chuckled. "Don't you give me orders. You may wear a pink dress, but you're still under me. As any slave. You're under anyone here. Don't think this color will. Step back." As she said this for the second time, the concubine frowned, annoyed. Who was to give her orders? She had been a concubine for over 5 years here. She wouldn't listen to the orders of Emir. Before she could add another word, a sudden flap of wings was heard, and she retreated in a hurry. She barely had time to move before a giant claw ripped the grass she had stood on a couple of seconds ago. If the concubine had been a bit more aware of her surroundings earlier, she would have seen the dark shape that had been growing bigger in the sky, coming their way at a scary speed. Cassandra had seen it coming from far away. Had the dragon gone hunting before looking for her? Cray growled, wrapping its large body around Cassandra, putting its head right where her hand was, as she gently patted and scratched the dark scales. The dragon was happily growling, glad to be reunited with her, but to the 3 terrorized women, those sounds were horrifying. Moreover, the woman who stood unaffected at the center of those mountains of scales was still staring at them, completely fearless. "You got interrupted. Please continue." I. Before she could gather her thoughts, Cray's large tail whipped in the pond, splashing them. All 3 women got drenched, and yet, they didn't even dare scream. They tried to retreat, but to their surprise, Cassandra smiled softly. "I believe you weren't done talking. Please stay." For the first time, they realized how scary this woman was. Because she could utter those words with the softest voice, the gentlest smile, while a murderous beast was standing right next to her. Cassandra hadn't really planned on cornering them, but Cray had come at the right time, and in a few minutes, she had decided she shouldn't let such women make easy prey of her. They would be an example, to show others she was no toy to play with. Like Corinne had told her, it would be better to teach them she wasn't going to be someone to take lightly. She would have her hands full dealing with the worst people already. She had no spare time for the childish games of bored concubines. After that episode, no other concubine dared to bother Cassandra for the next few days. It was made known within a few hours how scary the gentle-looking woman could be. She had kept all 3 women alone with her, making them cry, beg, and tremble in fear of being devoured at any given moment, for over an hour. Cassandra had only insisted they told the same stories over and over, but all 3 concubines didn't dare disobey and anger her or the beast. It could have seemed like a short time, but anyone who had ever been in the presence of one of the Imperial dragons knew it wasn't. Truth was, Cassandra had only intended to scare them a bit, and only caressed or scratched Cray during that time, but it had worked beyond wonders. It so happened that the black dragon still had fresh blood on its maw, and the concubines saw those ruby eyes shine their way in a scary manner for longer than they could endure. Even if she would never give the order to bite or injure, unless she was in a death threat situation, that sight was engraved in those women's minds. They had cried for hours after that to anyone who would listen, about how merciless the war god's concubine was, threatening to have the dragon eat their poor defenseless selves. After that, even if most concubines still held some doubt about how things really went, the fact that she was often followed by the black dragon was enough of a warning, and when Cray wasn't in sight, most feared the beast wasn't too far away. It was actually a bit of a funny sight. Cray kept following her like a dog, growling to get her attention, glaring at anyone who came close, and growled even more when she walked inside a building its large body couldn't follow her into. It actually caused a bit of worry to the servants that the palace's architecture wouldn't be able to withstand the beast's reckless climbing on the roofs to follow her scent. Cassandra was doing her best to get used to the Imperial Palace, though it was difficult. Firstly, that place was way too big for her to get used to. She got lost many times and would only realize once she asked someone how far she had drifted away from her initial destination. Secondly, she wasn't with Karen as often as she had hoped to be. The Emperor called for his son almost every day at dawn, and she helplessly spent breakfast and lunch alone, with the Imperial concubine mother, or in the concubine's gardens, only to be reunited with him right before dinner with all of the Imperial family. Lastly, this daily buffet was a torture for her. She hated being confined in a room full of people who glared at each other, no matter how vast that room was. Since she had demonstrated she had the backing of an Imperial dragon, and when Karen was in the room, no one dared to defy her too much, but she still hated that atmosphere. The only good part of it was that they would listen together to minister reports and news about what was going on in the country, and after a few days, Cassandra realized those dinners were also a way for the Emperor to test his sons. While the youngest brothers were usually fooling around with their concubines, enjoying the shows, and were annoyed by those topics, the 3 oldest princes were deeply involved. The oldest prince, Sephir, was an obvious bookworm and knew every topic by heart. At first, to Cassandra, he seemed to be the smartest of them all. However, after a while, she realized his decision-making was mostly based on past occurrences, and if no similar situations had happened in the past, he was usually at a loss. The only one who truly rivaled Karen was the second prince, Vrihan. Cassandra didn't like him. He had a face like a rat, tiny eyes, and a mean expression. More importantly, he glared at Karen anytime he would say anything and seemed like he was about to explode if their father agreed with him. Plus, his sister Featra supported anything he said unconditionally. Since their last meeting, Cassandra had managed to avoid that woman, but Featra made sure to glare her way any chance she could over dinner. "What do you think, White Lily?" Cassandra was surprised to hear the Emperor suddenly ask her opinion. This nickname he had given her had become sort of a title for her, whenever he addressed her, like she was some precious treasure. It was the first time he openly asked for her opinion on a matter. Until then, Cassandra had listened and whispered some of her ideas a couple of times to Karen, but she had never dared to interact with the Imperial family members while they had their talks. Also, it didn't seem like any other concubine was ever involved in those talks, as only the princes and, more seldomly, the princesses answered. She couldn't hide her surprise, but Karen soon caressed her back, spreading his warmth to her and making her feel a bit more confident. This topic was about some medical issues she knew about, an epidemic that had risen in the south. "I support the confinement idea, Your Highness. Until the real cause is found, nothing should leave or enter that village." "Shouldn't we simply kill all the infected?" hissed Featra, annoyed that Cassandra was even asked after she had given her own solution. "Nothing in the reports proves this disease is transmitted by the sick," calmly replied Cassandra. "It could be the food, the water, even the animals. Sending a doctor with medical knowledge, enough drugs to heal those in need, and guarding the area closely, may be enough to prevent the disease from spreading, especially in such a remote place." The Emperor nodded, looking satisfied. As expected of the Imperial physician. "Let's do this. Did you record all that she said?" While he was checking in with his secretary, Cassandra turned to Karen, who gently kissed her temple. Those few days, she had been spending a lot of time with some of the other Imperial physicians present in the palace, but for now, they had been learning more from her than she had learned from them. Some of Cassandra's knowledge of herbal medicine was revolutionary to them, and despite their annoyance at a female being acknowledged as a doctor at the beginning, the Imperial physicians had started opening up to her, one by one, teaching her their ways and discussing their knowledge. Hence, the Emperor knew she was doing well in that aspect and considered Cassandra's opinion. "Also, make sure to check around, see if it hasn't spread. Now, to the military." Before the Emperor ended his sentence, the first prince suddenly started coughing loudly, unable to stop. His concubines tried to help him, but he needed a few more minutes to catch his breath. This wasn't the first time. Cassandra had seen Prince Zephyr with this kind of issue several times before. Though she had considered a poison, from his pale look and thin figure, she guessed the first prince had never been healthy to begin with. Probably weak lungs or some respiratory disease. Unfortunately, she couldn't approach another prince and had to leave it to the Imperial physician appointed for him. However, as the days went on, she couldn't help but fear for the eldest brother. This man wouldn't live long. Once Zephyr caught his breath and reassured everyone, the Emperor threw the remaining topics away, along with his secretary, and called for more wine. Cassandra, however, was concerned. How would the death of one of the brothers change things? They only had 2 days left until the New Year's first celebrations. Once the week-long festivities were over, her prince had promised to bring her back to the Onyx Castle, at least for the later stages of her pregnancy. Cassandra didn't want to stay in the Imperial Palace longer than necessary. She loathed this place. "Are you tired?" he whispered in her ear. "I'm fine. Eat more." She nodded and took some of the grapefruit he was handing her. She had been craving those lately and emptied almost all the plates of grapefruit at each banquet by herself. Was it because of her baby? Cassandra found herself with some new crazy craving each day. Tonight, it was white fish. The cooks had worked hard to make some more ready for her, and she was enjoying it slowly. Cassandra wasn't the only pregnant concubine, as 2 of the 5th prince's women and 1 of the 2nd prince's concubines were showing off their round bellies, but she was the only one to be shown so much care. She didn't know if Karen or the Emperor had given special orders, but the servants seemed particularly careful while serving her and, more surprising, her food was tested before she ate anything. "Father, how grand will the New Year celebrations be this year?" asked one of the princesses. The usual, daughter of mine. We invited some neighboring countries, but not too many, and we will reopen the arena." While exclamations rose all around the room, Cassandra got a chill. The arena. Memories of a bloody slaughter came back to her mind. Despite her meeting with the prince, she could never forget that horrid scene, the dragons going after the humans and playing with their corpses. If it wasn't for Cray, she probably wouldn't have survived it either. Feeling her shiver a bit, Karen caressed her back. Cassandra usually warmed up from his touch, but this time, her expression was sad and his concubine was obviously lost in some dark thoughts. He frowned. "Cassandra." She shook her head, unwilling to speak. "Father, can we get fireworks?" asked one of the young princesses. "Tigers. I want to see wildcats. And more chariot races. And dancers." As the Imperial princesses started making more and more demands, Sherian, who had been silent on the seat next to Karen, clicked her tongue. "Are you going to pay for all this, sisters? Did you suddenly start working and earning enough to cover your childish, petty whims?" Her voice had the effect of a whip on them. Cassandra had never noticed, but Sherian was one of the oldest princesses around, and no one really dared to mess with her. Was it because of her being the war god's sister? Or her mother? However, none of the princesses dared to talk back to her, all looking down like children caught misbehaving. The Emperor laughed. "Wise as ever, my daughter. Well, it is true we won't spend too much this year, we've had a dry year, after all. Let's learn to restrain ourselves a bit, shall we? Fireworks and wildcats are fine, but we'll forget about chariot races. It's only good for spreading dust all around anyway, and I'm getting bored seeing the same people every year." "Forget it. Father, what about the dragon's sacrifice?" Everyone in the room immediately went silent and Cassandra frowned. Of course, Phaedra had been the one to suggest that, while looking at Cassandra, too. She knew exactly what she was doing, bringing that back up. The Emperor frowned. "Phaedra, we don't make human sacrifices on the New Year." "I want to see it, Father." I missed the last show. Phaedra's voice was full of confidence and she was smiling like a snake. Cassandra stood up and, not waiting for the Emperor's answer, walked away. She couldn't speak against an Imperial princess, but she could show her disagreement. She left the Imperial banquet without looking back, shivering and angry. Cassandra walked a few more steps, wondering where to go. She was angry and had no other way to protest than to leave the Imperial banquet, which upset her. For once, Cassandra felt she was truly too powerless, unable to stop Phaedra or oppose the Imperial princess. This place was really too harsh. Imperial concubine. She turned around, realizing someone had followed her. It only took her a couple of seconds to remember the young woman. Weeks and weeks ago, she was the young servant that had given her the first red dress. "You're Dahlia, right?" The young woman smiled. "I'm glad you remember me, my lady. Please don't. Just call me Cassandra, please." Dahlia chuckled. She hadn't changed much since Cassandra had seen her. She was still wearing a long green dress, with her dark hair in a braided bun. Bowing slightly, she walked up a bit closer to her. "Are you all right?" I needed some fresh air," said Cassandra. It was partially the truth. She felt stuffed, confined in that room with so many people. Only because her prince was there could she bear it. Dahlia seemed to understand and nodded slightly. "Do you want to rest in the Ivy Garden?" "The Ivy Garden? It's a smaller one, not many people use it," explained Dahlia with a smile. "But it's really pretty at night." Cassandra nodded and followed her. Dahlia seemed to know her way around the palace perfectly, even as the sun was slowly setting outside, putting them in the dark before long. After a few minutes, they finally arrived. As she had said, it was a much smaller one than the fancy garden the concubines usually used, but Cassandra instantly loved it. It only had one bench and a little pond with white fish. The walls around it were covered in ivy and little white flowers she had never seen before. The place seemed incredibly pure and pretty. While Cassandra walked around, Dahlia lit up a few lanterns, bringing some more light into the space. The concubine was still observing the place when a long growl was heard. Cray's head popped from behind one of the walls, those big red eyes finding her immediately. "Come," called Cassandra. It only took one word. Stepping over the wall, Cray hurried to her side, circling her with its body, head resting next to her. Of course, it was the perfect position for being scratched, and the dragon growled until Cassandra sat and started taking care of its favorite spot. Dahlia's mouth was open in awe and she didn't dare to step closer. The concubine was sitting right next to the dragon, totally fine, and scratching those scales as if it was just a huge dog. Though she was a brave girl, and the dragon seemed harmless this way, Dahlia sat a few meters away, close to the pond, but remained fascinated by the scene. "Thank you for bringing me here," said Cassandra after a few minutes. "I needed to relax a bit." "It's my pleasure, Lady Cassandra. Is it really fine not telling anyone where you are, though? I thought you would have a few servants with you." Cassandra shook her head. "It's fine. As long as Cray was with her, its master would know and be at ease." That was all Cassandra needed. Karen had let her leave, but he probably had to stay behind to discuss official matters with his father. As inexperienced as she was in politics, she understood that much. She also appreciated spending time alone with another woman her age. She missed Nebra a bit, and maybe because of their similar black hair, Dahlia reminded Cassandra of her friend somehow. "How long have you been working here?" asked Cassandra. "My whole life or so, I think. One of the palace's cooks found me on his doorstep and adopted me when I was just a baby. So, I became a servant as soon as I was old enough to be." Cassandra nodded. Dahlia was among the lucky ones. Most orphans were captured and made slaves. No wonder she knew the palace so well, despite its size. "Lady Cassandra, did you go to the Onyx Castle?" suddenly asked Dahlia, blushing slightly, but curious. Cassandra smiled, and just like that, both women started talking. On one side, Dahlia was loving stories from outside the palace, while Cassandra was keen to know any detail of this place that Dahlia could tell her. Having grown up here, Dahlia had seen many concubines. That's why she had felt Cassandra was different from the start. She didn't have that mighty attitude of a noble's daughter, or felt entitled in any way. She even spoke to her like an equal. "Do you want to explore the world, Dahlia?" The young woman seemed to hesitate for a while, blushing slightly. "Yes, but there is also someone I want to stay close to here. So, as long as that person is here, I don't think I'll be able to leave." "A lover?" asked Cassandra, judging from her reaction. Dahlia sighed. "I wish, but I doubt they even know I exist, so." Cassandra felt a bit sorry for Dahlia. She seemed like such a gentle woman, but to fall in love in the palace was a sad twist of fate. With so many pretty concubines everywhere, it was probably hard to be noticed by anyone around here. Cassandra knew how lucky she was that Karen didn't actually care about such things. If it wasn't for Cray, she would have been nothing but dust by now. Thinking about this, she kept caressing the sleek scales for a while, chatting with Dahlia, actually feeling calmer than she had been in a while. Much later in the night, the young woman was called back to work, and Cassandra was left alone in the garden. She didn't feel like going back, unsure if the banquet would be over by then, and so she decided to stay a bit longer. The quiet garden was actually nice. At night, the temperature was much better for Cassandra to endure, with the fresh wind and the warm dragon scales on her back. She rested, watching the stars, until she heard someone step closer. The prince slowly walked to her side, putting one knee down. "So, this is where you were?" Cassandra smiled. "His Highness, your father, didn't. He was unhappy you left." The concubine felt a bit happy about that. It meant he approved of her action, in a way. If he had been against her leaving, she couldn't even have taken one step out of the banquet hall. If the emperor was unhappy, it probably wasn't directed at her, but at the one who had caused her to leave. Cassandra felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. She wasn't used to being so bold, and every action made her insecure. She could still be killed at any moment, even if she was now wearing a pink dress. Karen's presence helped her forget about her worries too. "I like this garden," she said softly. "You want to stay here?" Since Cassandra hesitated for a while, he decided to sit next to her, letting her lay against his chest. Surrounded by the black dragon, they knew no one would dare to bother them. Resting her head on his shoulder, Cassandra kept staring at the stars, feeling his warm hand caressing her. My mom used to tell me about the stars every night. She'd teach me how to read them, their names and their past. Their past. Cassandra slightly nodded. In the tribe I grew up in, we did not believe in dragons and demigods, but in the sacred nature. I was taught that every life is sacred and equally precious. Plants, animals, humans, all equal and living together, each one with a purpose. And the elders said the stars are little reminders of each life that came and went. My mother said the brighter they were, the purer and shorter a life was. The prince frowned a bit. It was so rare for her to talk about her life before meeting him. No wonder she wasn't really afraid of Cray, and couldn't stand another's suffering. Did they teach you about medicine? Yes. My grandfather was the village chief and a good doctor. He knew every plant, every flower, every herb's name, and their properties. He taught me everything. After that, I kept trying to learn what I could when I could access my master's libraries or listen to the apothecary shop owners. Still, it was impressive. She was captured when she was very young, but had still managed to learn so much in such a short time and kept nurturing her talent by herself. Karen felt like his woman was more precious than any treasure one could gather in this palace. He caressed her hair, kissing her fingers gently. Your mother, whispered Cassandra. What about her? Can you tell me what she did to the second prince's mother? She heard him sigh. Their mother tried to poison me when I was young. She hated my mother and didn't want her son to have another rival born from her. But my mother found out and tricked her into drinking it herself. She had a slow and painful death. Cassandra felt disgusted. How could one do such a thing to a child? Since Imperial children were so resistant, drinking a poison meant for Karen must have caused that concubine to be in terrible agony. No matter what, Cassandra couldn't help but think it was a tragic death, even if she had brought it upon herself. Karine wasn't cruel by nature, but she certainly had to stand up to protect her children. In the same situation, Cassandra wondered if she would have had the guts to do the same thing and cause someone else's death. She put a hand on her tummy. Yes, maybe. Probably. She already loved her unborn child so much, she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. If she had gone through what Karine went through, losing several children, she might have gone crazy with despair. She shivered and hugged Karen closer, in need of his warmth. Are you cold? Just hug me, please. He gently obeyed, surrounding her with his sturdy arms and hot skin. Behind them, Cray softly growled, curling up a bit more around them. They stayed like this a long while until Cassandra fell asleep, and the prince decided it was getting a bit too cold for his expecting concubine to stay out. He gently carried her back to their bedroom, only noticing she was awake when laying her on the bed. No words were exchanged between them for a while. He helped her get rid of her jewelry and dress, then laid next to her. Cassandra's emerald eyes were shining with the candle light between them, as she kept staring at the war god, half asleep. My prince, she whispered. Her voice was so soft, he thought he had misheard it. My name, he said, getting closer to her, placing one arm around her. Karen, I love you. The war god remained stunned for a while, unable to say a word. Cassandra chuckled, observing his baffled expression for the first time. Did he really not know? She got a bit closer and put a quick peck on his lips, despite her shyness. Her heart was filled with something warm and sweet, and that secure feeling whenever that man was close. Karen didn't stay frozen for long though. The prince's eyes dropped down to her lips and drew her in for a much more intense, deep kiss. Cassandra helplessly blushed, feeling his lips and tongue claiming her so fiercely. His caresses on her skin were still gentle, but it had a slightly different feel to it. When they separated, Cassandra couldn't help but smile, a bit out of breath. "Aren't you going to answer me?" she whispered gently. Karen stayed silent, scrutinizing her very seriously. After a while, he took a deep breath, looking stern. "Marry me, Cassandra." The young concubine was taken back in surprise, expecting anything but those words. It took her a few seconds to understand what he had just said. To marry him? Her? She was just, and already, her thoughts got lost in a storm. After a few seconds, she laughed nervously. "Did you just?" The war god's expression was still just as serious. Cassandra tried to sit up, but he held her wrists in place to keep her lying down. "You don't want to?" he asked. The young concubine sighed. "If you marry me, you won't be able to change your mind." "I know. Even if you meet someone much prettier and younger later," she added. "I know." What was he thinking? Cassandra wished she was inside his head right now, to understand how the war god functioned. Certainly not like most men. Becoming a high-ranked concubine after spending 8 or 9 years as a slave was already unheard of, but becoming someone's wife? No normal man would have thought of such a thing. There was a huge gap between the concubines and the official wife. A gap so important, most of the concubines in this palace would have killed to hear those words. A man's official wife had an unshakable position. The Dragon Empire didn't recognize divorces, and even if one of the partners died, the other would never be able to replace him or her. While concubines could be abandoned or dismissed, an official wife would never need to worry about that. Hence, most men of power made sure to marry a woman from a strong background, with good looks and brains. Cassandra felt like she probably didn't check at least 2 of those boxes. "Cassandra," he softly spoke her name, taking her out of her thoughts. "You wouldn't be able to take another concubine," she said. "I'd never allow it." That was one of the powers of the official wife. No concubines could be brought in by the husband without her consent. Therefore, most men would rather not pick a wife and have plenty of concubines instead. Or at the very least, make sure their spouse closed their eyes to a new woman. Cassandra already knew she wouldn't be able to do that. She was already too attached to him, emotionally and physically. She would rather die than share him with another woman. "It's fine," replied the prince. "It isn't fine. I won't be able to do much to help you. I'm not as smart as your mother, or as powerful as your sister." Cassandra was worried. If something happened between him and his brothers, she would be powerless. She had no backing, nothing to help him. His brother's women probably had a lot of money, influence, and scholars behind them. A merchant or even a minister's daughter would have been 100 times better than her to be his wife. However, no matter how much she thought about it, Cassandra knew that man too well. He wouldn't change his mind. He was odd and stubborn about what he wanted and didn't want. Luckily for her, she was among the things he liked most. She smiled and leaned in closer to him, stealing another kiss. He never refused her kisses, and it wouldn't be the case for this one either. Gently brushing his fingers through her hair, he tasted her sweetness, rolling with her on the bed. His young concubine was obviously too tired tonight, her eyes kept closing and her breathing slowed. The war god was fine with that, she definitely deserved some rest. But you didn't answer me, he remarked as Cassandra was half asleep on his chest. She smiled. You do that often. He frowned, wondering what she was talking about. But before he could even begin to figure it out, she had fallen fast asleep. He sighed, putting her small hand to his lips to kiss her pale skin, and wrapped her gently in his embrace. He then closed his eyes, too. The next morning, Cassandra woke up with a horrible feeling. Something smelled terribly bad. She struggled to sit up. It was so early, it was barely dawn outside and her prince was still soundly sleeping next to her. Yet, she couldn't stay in bed. She stood up and glanced at the tray of food someone had brought in while they were asleep. She then stumbled to the wash basin. Her skin was covered in goosebumps and she kept gagging above the basin, her head spinning. Cassandra. Karen had woken up the moment she moved, but now she seemed really unwell. He rushed to her side, worried. He had no idea what was going on until Cassandra loudly threw up. Cassandra, you're sick? Is it poison? Food, she managed to stutter, pointing at the tray. The prince frowned before understanding that her sickness was due to her pregnancy, not any sort of poisoning. He grabbed the whole tray and threw it out of the closest open window, before running back to her. What can I do to help? He asked while caressing her hair. Cassandra shook her head. She was just trying to breathe a little deeper, and she felt too embarrassed to talk after vomiting. She had occasional random morning sickness, but this was the first in his presence and the most embarrassing one. While Karine knew about the unpleasant consequences of pregnancy, her son was clueless. Since his concubine couldn't formulate any request, Karen called out for servants to assist. Dahlia and another young woman rushed in to help Cassandra. Lady Cassandra, would you like some water? Whispered Dahlia. Please. Unhappy, Karen stood to the side with his arms crossed, watching the two servants take care of his concubine. He hated being unable to help, but this was a woman's matter. If Cassandra was uncomfortable with his help, he'd rather do nothing and let the servants assist her. After a few minutes, Cassandra was able to sit down and talk. With the prince by her side rubbing her back, she let Dahlia know the ingredients and smells that usually triggered her nausea or made it worse. The young servant nodded in acknowledgement. I will make sure the kitchen knows, Lady Cassandra. As Dahlia stood up to leave, Karen watched her and turned to Cassandra. You can make her your private servant if you want, he suggested. To his surprise, Cassandra's eyes widened in mild disbelief. Really? He had thought she would straight out refuse the idea, but on the contrary, she seemed to love it. He nodded. "Are you feeling better now?" "Yes, I might even be a bit hungry, to be honest." "This baby is really moody." Karen nodded and put a hand on the little bump. "His son. That child better be good to his mother once he's born." After a while, Dahlia reappeared with a different tray and some of the specific food Cassandra had requested. The only thing they could find, though, was a variety of nuts that grew further south, which made the prince frown. Cassandra, however, was satisfied with what Dahlia had gathered in such a short amount of time. She cleaned herself up a bit, got changed, and decided to eat in the closest open space she could find, as she didn't want to stay in the room where she had just vomited minutes ago. The prince followed closely behind her, to everyone's surprise. The imperial servants couldn't help but stare at the war god accompanying his concubine like she was a precious treasure he needed to keep within arm's reach. As soon as they sat in the garden, Cray appeared over their heads and even bickered with its master about who would sit closest to the concubine. Dahlia watched as the scene unfolded before her. With Cassandra chuckling between the dragon and its master, she couldn't help but feel that Cassandra might just be the luckiest concubine around. "Can we go search around the brothels today?" suddenly asked Cassandra, turning to the prince. Karen frowned. "You're sick." "I'm not sick, I'm pregnant. I will be fine. Dahlia can take care of my needs." The young servant avidly nodded in agreement. Karen glared at her, immediately causing her to look down in fear. "No. I wouldn't be able to accompany you." He probably had more meetings with the Emperor and his military advisors today again, but Cassandra was tired of doing nothing aside from getting lost and sipping tea with his mother. She took a deep breath and insisted again. "Please. I'll probably be safer there than I am here." That part was true. With her pink dress and an imperial servant following her, no one would dare to lift a finger towards her. In the palace, however, she could be attacked at any time. The prince's frown continued. He didn't like having her in a different place. It was fine when she was with his mother in the Diamond Palace, but "Go with Sherian," he finally said. Cassandra smiled widely, unable to hide her satisfaction. She could finally start looking for her younger sister. Moreover, she would definitely be safe with an imperial princess. She kissed his scratchy cheek swiftly. "Thank you," she whispered. This simple kiss distracted him from frowning. He sighed, surrendering himself to her and kissed her back. Seeing this, Dahlia discreetly left them. A couple of hours later, Dahlia was surprised to see that the young concubine was still accompanied by the dragon. She had heard from other servants how the beast was infatuated with her. But seeing it like this was a bit different. Any move Cassandra made, Cray was watching like a curious puppy following its master. The large dragon struggled to follow her with its huge body, sometimes crawling over the buildings and growling at the servants who appeared too suddenly. When Sherian arrived though, it didn't dare growl at her. "The Red District?" "Really?" asked the princess. "I am looking for my younger sister," explained Cassandra. "My best opportunity to find her is there." "I see, very well, that might be a fun outing," said Sherian. "And it gives me an excuse to avoid mother's nagging about my lifestyle." Sherian's way to have fun wasn't to her mother's taste. Hence, Karine usually resorted to a silent protest by visiting her from dawn until dusk, unless the princess was busy elsewhere, that is. Cassandra was surprised to learn Sherian was the most involved princess in the Empire's politics. She attended most of the meetings along with her brothers and refused to be defeated by any man in the room. She was well respected in most circles for being a smart, strong woman who didn't need a man to back her up, not even her own father. Like the other members of her family, she had a short temper, however. Bringing her sword to meetings wasn't just for decorative purposes. As the women left the palace, Cassandra felt like a big weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She couldn't fully relax in that place without the prince around. Though she had never been there personally, Cassandra had lived long enough in the capital to know where the Red District was. She naturally headed there with Sherian and Dahlia, the black-scaled dragon following behind. It was a truly strange procession that the bystanders witnessed that day. A concubine in a pink dress, along with an imperial princess, only one servant with them, and an imperial dragon that struggled to fit inside the busy streets. Many displays fell victim to a wing or tail in its wake, despite the merchants' desperate attempts to push it out of the way. No one wanted to hinder their path, and the trio progressed easily through the streets. The reputation of the imperial family preceded them. Any glance, gesture, or sound could trigger a brutal and violent death, and no one wanted to leave any chance for that to happen. Sherian's purple outfit was like a ghost, making nearly everyone run away. Though she found it sad, Cassandra understood the people's fears and didn't comment on that. There were too many spiteful princesses back at the palace, she had witnessed it herself. People were bound to fear them. As they progressed in the streets, Cassandra was surprised when she realized that Sherian knew the way perfectly. "Have you been to the Red District before, Your Highness?" "I already told you to just call me Sherian, didn't I? You're my brother's woman, you need to grow a backbone, and yes, I go there often." Cassandra didn't mind her rude way of speaking. After living with Sherian for a bit at her mother's palace, she had grown used to it. Sherian was extremely blunt and literally had no filter on any subject. She spoke that way to anyone, except maybe her own mother. "Really?" asked Cassandra. "I mean, I didn't think members of the Imperial family would venture to such a place." "Oh, some do. I like to go shopping." 4. Cassandra then understood her meaning and desperately blushed. A question popped in her head, but she chased it away, as she could never gather the courage to ask. After all, she had experienced herself how playful Sherian was. Behind them, Dahlia was walking silently, glancing back and forth between the two women. Though she had volunteered to accompany Cassandra, she was just as shy as the concubine about going there. She silently continued peeking at the imperial princess, intimidated, but she also kept an eye on the dragon following them. Like common people, Dahlia was naturally afraid of it. If she hadn't seen it being so gentle with Cassandra before, she probably would have been absolutely terrified about coming along. "So, where do you want to start?" asked the princess as they reached the district. During the day, that area was known to be relatively calm. Most people here worked at night, so the brothels were barely just opening their doors to let the caretakers, servants, and slaves inside to do their chores. Cassandra glanced left and right, but she had no real clue. "I guess we'll just have to ask around." "Right. We better do it now before they notice your pet and start screaming and running away." Oh! Cassandra had almost forgotten about the dragon. Indeed, it would be a bit inconvenient to walk Cray around. She smiled and walked up to it, immediately getting all of the dragon's attention. Cray had been following very curiously to where they were going. When the young concubine turned to it, it could barely contain his excitement, crushing 2 stalls with the swish of its tail. Cassandra put her hands on the warm snout, scratching it. "Could you wait for us here, Cray?" She wasn't sure how much the dragon understood her words, but since the mountain episode, she knew how to make it lay down and wait. She began patting its snout with both hands until it laid its whole body down. Cray closed its eyes, ready for a little nap. "Good boy," she said with a smile. "Don't eat people." Whether it had understood that last part or not, Cassandra wasn't certain. Cray, however, opened one large red eye to watch her walk away with the 2 other women. Dahlia was in shock. She thought the young concubine must have the blood of a goddess to order around a dragon like that. She had it obeying her commands like a pet. The dragon's owner didn't even need to be present. She had previously thought the dragon was pampering her because the prince was always around, but she had it all wrong. Now, per Cassandra's request, the most dangerous beast in this empire was taking a nice little nap in the middle of the street. "Let's start with this one," suggested Sherian, heading to the closest building. "You know what to ask." Cassandra nodded, stepping ahead. Needless to say, anyone who opened their door was completely struck by the sight of the 2 women. One woman wearing the Imperial purple and the other was clearly a high-ranked concubine. A couple of the people Cassandra spoke with even wondered internally if this could be some sort of scam, seeing as the strange duo was accompanied by only 1 servant. "I'm looking for my younger sister," Cassandra repeated for the 8th time that day. She would be 16 years old now. She was captured 9 years ago. "She probably resembles me." Back when they were children, Miss Andra and Cassandra indeed looked a lot alike. They had the same brown hair, the same thin nose, and even the exact same emerald eyes. Even if her sister had matured, Cassandra hoped that their whiter skin would help people remember her. "Sorry, Imperial concubine," said the woman. "I don't remember anyone that matches your description. You might want to ask next door though, they usually purchase the girls when they're young. They're well known for their training." Cassandra thanked her, but she was starting to feel a bit discouraged. Someone should have been able to remember Miss Andra by now. Even if many girls came in and out of these establishments, not many would have been from an entirely different origin. Compared to the gold and brown tan skins around them, Miss Andra should have stood out. "So boring," said Sherian. "We can't even see their girls at this hour. We didn't come here to shop, remember? Speak for yourself. Do you buy your servants here? Instead of the usual market?" asked Cassandra. She had noticed how Sherian surrounded herself with beautiful things and attractive people. Most of her servants were gorgeous women and handsome young men. She didn't seem to care much about their personalities though. Once again, Cassandra repeated the same words to the old woman who ran the next brothel. However, this one wore an odd expression while Cassandra spoke. "Oh, that's why you seemed so familiar, my lady. You're me's older sister, you look just like her." "Me? Yes, yes, me. How could I forget her? That child was a little spitfire. Always running around yelling and stealing food. A little demon, that one." Sherian sent a doubtful look to Cassandra. "You sure that sounds like your sis?" "She was always more energetic than me," whispered Cassandra before turning back to the woman. "Is she here? Could I see her?" "Oh, no, no, Imperial concubine. She left years ago. We sold her to another brothel, one of our top clients couldn't stand her. I think she went to, yes, let me check my notebook, it should be written down somewhere." The old lady disappeared for a while, leaving those two standing in the entrance. Cassandra's heart was thumping loudly in her chest. Could this really be Miss Andra? Did she finally find a lead, after all these years? She returned to give them an address to another brothel a few streets away. As soon as they got there though, Cassandra's heart broke. The place was closed. "Crap, do you think they will open soon? Maybe we could just wait a bit," she sighed. Next to her, Sherian rolled her eyes and took out her sword. "Seriously, act like your rank, pretty face. You're an Imperial concubine. You don't wait." With those last words, Sherian brutally destroyed the entrance door, sending the panels of wood flying away. She had released her full strength on them, making it even larger than it was supposed to be. Cassandra felt guilty for whoever would have to pay for the damages, but still followed the princess inside. A man came running quickly towards them. And while his initial intention was clearly to yell, his mouth snapped shut once he spotted the two women. His mouth curled into an odd grin. Your Highnesses, can this humble man ask what has caused your anger?" he stammered awkwardly, glancing at the large opening. "You," said Sherian, visibly out of patience. She steadily pointed her sword at the man's chin. "Tell us if you bought a girl that looked like this concubine, years ago. She may have gone by the name Me." The man only took a quick glance at Cassandra, very eager to answer. "Why, yes, Your Highness. I remember her, but she isn't here. We sold that girl 3 months later, we couldn't keep her. She had bitten the customers and hit the owner." "Really?" said Sherian, turning to Cassandra with an admiring look. "Cassie, it sounds like your sis took all the fiery side and didn't leave you any, did she?" "Where did she go next?" asked Cassandra, ignoring her. I think the master sold her to another brothel, a few streets down, but I know that place ended up selling her too. 5 weeks later, the same thing happened." Cassandra sighed. Miss Andra really didn't make things easy for them, though she was a bit happy that her younger sister had tried to resist her fate. She just hoped she hadn't run into more trouble by doing so. For the next hour, the same scenarios repeated over and over again. Each time they asked a new brothel, they got similar stories. It appeared Miss Andra only ever stayed in any of the brothels for a few weeks to a few months. She'd end up injuring a customer or worker, and consequently would be sold again. Even Sherian was impressed. "I hope she didn't get treated too badly and punished for all of this," said Cassandra as they walked their way to the next brothel. "Oh, she probably was," replied the princess. "However, the brothel owners are careful not to scar or permanently injure their merchandise. She probably got cold showers or was starved. Things like that. I'm starting to get very curious though. She must be a real beauty if people kept buying her despite her reputation." Cassandra had the same feeling. Every brothel that Miss Andra had been to, no matter how short, clearly remembered her as soon as they saw Cassandra. How much longer would it take to find her? As they were about to enter yet another brothel, Sherian suddenly stopped, her eyes elsewhere with a glare. "Sherian! Wait, it's..." Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.